Hello and welcome. This is Mr. Harold coming to you live from the back corner of the room. Of course, this isn't live, it's a video. I'm going to be telling you today not only about The Hobbit, but about the background of Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series. So let's get started. First, J.R.R. Tolkien. Here he is. There's a picture of him as a young man. He wrote The Hobbit in 1937, and then he later wrote the Lord of the Rings series. And what a lot of people don't know is he actually wrote about 19, 20 or so other novels that go along with it. The most famous one is probably The Silmarillion, and it came out after he died, actually. It was sort of written in pieces, and his son put it together. Now, Mr. Tolkien, he was an Anglo-Saxon and an Old English professor. Now, we're going to get to Old English when we study the Beowulf unit in Quest 3, but here's just a sample of what it sounds like.
Gardena in Jardragom, Theod Kuninga Thrunge Frunen, Hutha Etherlinga Sellen Fremedon. Of shield shaving, Jedra Threatum Monigum make the Majors have off. A soda erlast, Suthan erst wears Felshift funden. Heitas frofery bad waves and no wolknum earth minum tha.
Pretty weird, huh? It's hard to believe that's actually English, but believe it or not, that's Old English. That's where English came from. We'll deal with it a lot more in the next unit. He could probably speak it. As a result of being able to speak Old English, he was very heavily influenced by languages and language studies. In fact, he used to invent languages in his spare time. Additionally, he had served in World War II, especially in England, and so he was really deeply impacted by that. Actually, this should say World War I. He was fought in World War I and World War II as well, so both of them had a strong impact on him. And he wasn't really a formal author. He did write a number of books, but he didn't have training as an author in narrative, at least. He was more of a college professor. That's him as a young man, and this is him when he was a good deal older. Most people think of this picture when they think of Mr. Tolkien. So Mr. Tolkien made a world called Middle-earth. Now, Middle-earth is two things. It is a fictional fantasy universe, but he wanted people to view it as England and the world itself before humans had taken over, before magic had left altogether. Think about ancient Greece. You learned, I'm sure, in middle school or perhaps earlier in high school when you read the Odyssey about the Greek gods and goddesses, Zeus and Hades and Hercules and Odysseus. The Britain people really don't have that. So what Mr. Tolkien did is he made one up for them. He made up a world where there were still magic and there were still multiple races and where each group had their own strengths and weaknesses. Let me tell you about a few of them. Here are a couple. We have the dwarves up top, the top left. They had long beards. They were very short, very greedy individuals, but pretty good at war. These aren't your Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In addition, we have elves. Now, elves, sometimes people think of Santa's elves, but these elves were actually more like superhumans. They did have pointed ears. They all looked good. They were probably perpetually 35 years old. However, they did live forever. Unless you got your head chopped off or died in battle, if you were an elf, there's no reason for you ever to die. Humans did exist, but they weren't completely in power. The elves were probably the most dominant race. However, in The Lord of the Rings, the elves actually leave Middle-earth, paving the way for humans to take over. Finally, we have the hobbits. Hobbits are almost identical to people, but they're shorter. They really don't have any skills. They really don't have any magic powers, and they really don't have any society. They're sort of just peaceful people. He likely based these hobbits off of the peaceful folk in England, but he also uses the Hobbit as a starting point. Think about you in this game. You start off as a time wanderer, and you have to do all of the assignments as written. Well, as you go through the year, you're going to gain powers. You're going to perhaps become similar to a dwarf and specialize in money and war, or you'll become an elf and specialize in longevity and society, or you'll specialize in a human and have sort of a mixture of all of them. Now, there were also some evil races. We have trolls. That's on the bottom here. A troll was larger, usually not quite as smart. And then we have orcs. Now, orcs, if you look at the history of Middle-earth, orcs used to be elves, and they became evil when they were kidnapped by the Dark Lord. So those are just some of the races in Middle-earth. And there's a lot of parallels we'll be talking about throughout the story. Here's a brief history of Middle-earth, and it's actually thousands of years long. So I'm just going to give you a real quick overview. In the beginning, the world was created. We had the original creator, Eru, and Eru spoke this song and essentially sung the world into being, similar to pretty much any creation story. The creator speaks and the world is made. There's two types of beings. There's the Valar. They're the superior beings. They're more like the Greek gods, the 12 that lived on Olympus. And then we have some others that were created as sub creatures, the Maiar, for example, and then, of course, the elves. Melkor was one of these Valar, one of those original powerful creatures, and he rebelled against the Valar. Now, the First Age begins when the elves are created by the Valar and by the Creator, and what happens is Melkor, who has become evil, kidnaps the elves, changes them into orcs. Melkor himself at this point is evil and declares war on the Valar and the Maiar and all of the positive elves. The First Age continues as Morgoth, as he's now called, no longer Melkor, loses his war and is eventually destroyed. So here's a picture of him over here. If you've seen the Lord of the Rings movie, you might notice that he looks a little bit familiar. He looks like somebody else. In the Second Age, we have Sauron. Now, he looks like this at first, but over the course of the Second Age, he becomes evil, and he looks like this. He's an evil Dark Lord. That's what Dark Lords look like. In the Second Age, we have Numenor. These are superior humans. They're men without a lot of their flaws. They're lesser than the elves. They're lesser than the Maiar. They're lesser than the Valar, but they still are better than normal humans today. These humans are tricked. Sauron convinces them they need to try to go into the Undying Lands. Essentially, they need to try to walk into heaven, where the Valar and the Maiar are hanging out. They try this, and their whole world gets destroyed. Very similar to the Garden of Eden story. As a result, Sauron is cast out, becomes evil, and tries to take over the world by making these powerful rings. The Second Age ends with the War of the Rings, in which Sauron is destroyed by an alliance of the men, the descendants of the Númenóreans, and the elves. That leads us to the Third Age. The Third Age is where the Lord of the Rings takes place. During the Third Age, the Ring of Power that Sauron used, it is lost. The men are lost. They have no king. He's been killed in this battle with Sauron. The elves are planning to leave Middle-earth, and there's rumors that maybe the ring is going to be found and maybe Sauron is going to come back. Now, if you have seen The Lord of the Rings, you know how the Third Age ends. If you haven't, I'm not going to give it away for you. The Hobbit takes place in the middle of the Third Age, right as all of this is happening. The ring is still missing. We don't exactly know where it is. There's rumors of a darkness growing, but nothing confirmed yet. And the dynamic between men and elves is still a little bit unclear. So that's just a very brief overview into the world of Middle-earth. You're probably not going to be tested or quizzed on it, but this will give you some insight as you start to go through. One more thing, you're going to meet a wizard named Gandalf, and you might think, who is this guy? Gandalf is actually a Maiar. He appears to be an old man, a wizard, but he's actually sort of a sub-angel. So he's a pretty powerful character. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping by. Enjoy the unit, and good luck reading The Hobbit.